We're honored to have with us today an esteemed panel of speakers, whom I now welcome on stage for this seminar's panel discussion on autonomous weapons systems, artificial intelligence and its implication to international humanitarian law, strategies to tackle AWS and the dual use of AI. I now invite the following panelists to take the stage. Dr. Andrei Krozik, Regional Legal Advisor, ICRC, Ms. Yanitra Kumarguru, Visiting Lecturer, University of Colombo, and the Sri Lankan Coordinator for the Global Campaign Stop Killer Robots, Colonel Nalin Herath, Director, Media, and Spokesman of the Ministry of Defense and Overlooking Director, General and Acting Director, Institute of National Security Studies, Professor Ajit Dialvis, Chief Innovation Officer of the National Innovation Agency, Senior Professor of Chemical and Process Engineering, University of Moratuwa, and finally, the moderator for the discussion, Ambassador Ravinath Aryasinghe, Executive Director, LKI. Ambassador Aryasinghe is a former Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka. A retired member of the Sri Lanka Foreign Service, he served as the Ambassador of Sri Lanka to the United States of America, as well as the European Union, Belgium, and Luxembourg, as Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva and Consul General of Sri Lanka to Switzerland, with concurrent credentials as Sri Lanka's ambassador to the Holy See. In the Foreign Ministry, he has served as spokesman and headed the Public Diplomacy Division, and as Additional Secretary, Economic Affairs and Trade, led the Economic Diplomacy Program. On leave from the Foreign Service, he also served as a National Information Officer in the Office of the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Sri Lanka. I would now like to invite Ambassador Ravinath Aryasinghe to commence the proceedings of the session.
Thank you very much. And again, good evening to anyone who joined a little late. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I think we've had a very significant introduction to the subject, and I would be only hastening the time of getting to hear perspectives if I was to say too much by way of introduction to this panel discussion. So I'm going to reserve the right to come back later because I happen to be the only person who has served as a state in these discussions, to bring you a little bit of the context of how states actually deal with this issue. But that can wait. Let's first get the perspectives, and I'm glad that Andre is with us on this panel, because I think he can wrap up in the panel, picking some of the areas which might come up as we go along. But that was a very calm and lucid presentation of what, as I forewarned all of you, is a very complicated subject. So let us go straight away to Yanitra Kumarguru. She is an attorney at law and a lecturer in law. She holds a Bachelor in Laws from the University of Colombo and a Master's in Law from Harvard University. Her areas of research include disarmament, humanitarian law, technology and human rights, as well as gender. She serves as the coordinator for the Sri Lanka campaign to stop killer robots, an organization which I have had very close association with at the time we chaired the CCW and were trying to get laws on the agenda of states. And this is done via the Forum on Disarmament and Development as part of the coalition of the campaign to stop killer robots. Yanitra, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So to start off the panel, I've been tasked with speaking largely about the ethics underlying the question of autonomous weapons. And in doing so, I might look at a couple of the legal principles also in a little bit of detail. So I'll start off with just the question of why we're looking at ethics in relation to autonomous weapons themselves, move on to some of the ethical issues that are recognized within the framework of the law in terms of IHL, and touch on IHRL, that is humanitarian law and human rights law. Then move on to questions of ethics that perhaps are a little bit more on the fringes and beyond the purview of the law, and finally tackle the debates that are within this framework in itself. Two things, since we're short of time. Firstly, I will try and stick to the best case possible with autonomous weapons, so to present its strongest case while we're addressing it in relation to the counters. And secondly, I won't be touching a lot on, in terms of the approaches, the ethical approaches to autonomous weapons in terms of theoretical framework. But should you be so inclined, I suspect that you would realize that some of the arguments we discuss can be traced to a certain approach or the other, and you may also see at certain points a few underlying tensions between such approaches as well. So just to start off in terms of why ethics and the role of ethics in disarmament and with regard to the legal framework on autonomous weapons. The reason I'm looking at this is because sometimes ethics is considered a little bit more of a soft subject than something as, you know, as concrete as the legal framework surrounding something. But the thing about autonomous weapons, or with ethics and the law in general, is that both underlying ethical questions and the law itself are always inherently interlinked. And this is especially so in questions where perhaps the law has not yet concretely made its statement. This does not mean that the legal framework has not covered the subject matter. It merely has maybe not had specific legislation to deal with it, and so on. And in such cases, it is often questions of ethics and norms that then underlie the way forward for the legal process in itself. So that was one reason. And also that's a strong reason as to why, especially in relation to a subject like autonomous weapons or new technology in general, the question of ethics becomes especially important. That we have those questions to turn to, as moral or philosophical as they may sound. Secondly, in relation to international humanitarian law specifically, I think you could also make the argument that ethics here would be especially relevant. For those who in the audience who may not be familiar with international humanitarian law, the law itself has what is sometimes described as a safety net for those combatants and civilians in war, which is to say that in cases that are not yet covered by existing treaties, civilians and combatants would still remain under the protection and the authority of what is termed as the principles of humanity and the dictates of public conscience. So if you look to a phrase like, you know, the principles of humanity and the dictates of public conscience, there is an especially clear, at least to me, link between ethics and the legal framework that would prevail in such an instance as well, and would then be very relevant to us, especially in instances of armed conflict where you may have autonomous weapons being used. And for this reason, while often states, corporations, whatever stakeholders often look to law as a first resource and of course military considerations, ethics is something that I think would still have to be kind of deferred back to and looked to a lot more in this debate. One more thing I want to highlight about the role of ethics and in relation to the debate about autonomous weapons is in relation to the stakeholders involved. In a lot of questions that are to do with treaties, legal frameworks and disarmament, we often associate the question of taking these decisions, abiding by ethics, with states and states alone. But in disarmament especially, along with other areas, the question of ethics and how this may impact your decision also stretches very concretely into those who are responsible for developing the weapons themselves, be it corporations, whatever the institution is, and also, especially in areas like this, in relation to the technology sector as well. And if you have been following the debate around drones, autonomous weapons, and so on, you will have seen projects where those who are leading in the tech sector have either taken a stand, left the project, spoken out about it, and so on. So the role in relation to ethics there, I just wanted to highlight as not just being limited to states, but also in relation to other stakeholders as well. Moving then into the ethical questions in relation to what is already clearly flagged within the law. The principle of distinction was already mentioned in one of the speeches this evening. And the principle of distinction is one of the cornerstone principles of international humanitarian law. At risk of oversimplifying, I'll just state it a little bit more clearly. That is that it demands that in armed conflict, you have to distinguish between combatant and civilian. Similarly, between military property and civilian property, when you are launching an attack of any sort. And given, like Professor Kozik said, the general overarching theme of IHL is the balancing of military necessity and humanity, this is obviously key to the implementation of any operation in a way that is that it aligns with the demands of the law. Now, one of the ethical questions that are central here, where I think it's most important that you would consider the failure of autonomous weapons to comply, is this principle of distinction. Because where physical presence on a battlefield or remotely in itself struggles with the question of who is a combatant, who is a civilian, especially in moments where you don't have a lot of time to make that judgment, how are you going to then program what is in essence a machine to then distinguish between combatant and civilian? And say perhaps you should be able to, in whatever instance we are confident enough, as a hypothesis, to say we could program machines to do so. Then my question would be, how do you go about doing so? Because you are confident that you can code it into the machine, or there is a process of machine learning that you are confident in that can make this decision for you. However, how do you ensure, firstly, that every single scenario that could arise in a very complex instance of an armed conflict is provided for? And secondly, how do you know that when those decisions are made, that coding is made, the principles that you are inputting into this machine are specified to such a microscopic level that you are not entering your own human biases? We all know as a fact that there have been instances, and there often are instances, where split-second reactions that are necessary in the field can be informed by our own biases, stereotypes, whatever that is generally associated with that. So if you then say it is possible to still program a machine to carry out this decision as to who is a combatant or who is a civilian, how do we ensure that the information that has gone into and then translated into such programming carries absolutely no human biases, when none of us are free of biases as well? The difference is that, like Professor Kozik mentioned, it will be amplified, and that it is also under military secrecy, which I will come back to later. And in terms of those specific instances, what I meant is, for example, if you have an area of conflict, and again, I oversimplify, but if you have a child pick up a gun that's on the road, does that, to a machine that has been given characteristics of what would constitute a combatant or a civilian, how does the machine end up computing that question? So that was in relation to the principle of distinction. And where the principle of distinction is then compromised in such a way that it is not possible to let the machine clearly distinguish between combatant and civilian, it will then spill into two other principles of IHL that are cornerstones, which are proportionality and precaution. Precaution being that you would take all those necessary precautions in order to ensure that there is no excessive civilian loss of life and so on. And the principle of proportionality being that any incidental loss of civilian life or property in a conflict should be in proportion, should not be disproportionate, to the military advantage that is obtained. So if you then have a flawed calculation of how you distinguish between combatant and civilian, that is going to inevitably spill over into the question of proportionality and precaution as well. The second thing I wanted to mention as an ethics issue within the legal framework, and I know we're not touching on that body of law a lot today, but is in relation to the human rights framework as well. Because although, of course, the use of autonomous weapons in armed conflict is extremely important and definitely urgent, there is also its parallel possible use during peacetime as well. And one of the instances, for example, where it has been looked at as a cause for immediate concern is that of policing or border control and so on. So if you look at a question of autonomous weapons in border control or policing, you then have ethical questions that are already recognized by the law, the right to life, for example, or the freedom of movement in relation to, for example, border control as well. The final one that I wanted to touch on in relation to ethical issues recognized by the law is that of accountability, which I think was again already touched on today. But just a question of ethically, if you are going to go ahead and say, no, we still have faith in these machines, you can teach them how to distinguish between a civilian and a combatant, etc. And then you go ahead, and if there is a transgression, and if you can see that there has been something wrong that has happened, and this has happened in previous uses of less refined technology as well, then, who do you hold accountable? Is it the designers of the software? Is it the person who pressed the activation button? Is it no one, because there is now some, it's an entity in control of it, its own targeting? So those were the points in relation to the law, the ethical points that I wanted to highlight. And now to go beyond this to a couple of questions that maybe are beyond the direct purview of the law. They would still fall under, the equation of military necessity versus humanity that Professor Kozik highlighted. But in relation to just going a little bit more beyond the parameters of this, of the direct purview of the law, I would say. Two things happen when you say okay to autonomous weapons, especially those that would be responsible for injuring or killing humans. One, this means that you are then all right with delegating to a machine the task to take a life. You're all right with a machine making the decision of a life and death decision, essentially. And secondly, in being all right with a machine taking a life and death decision, you are then inevitably almost reducing the human lives who are impacted by said weapon to a bunch of data, because that is how the machine is processing its decision and so on. So on a more, slightly more philosophical question, an ethical beyond the law question, are we all right with then allowing these two things to happen, for a machine to take life and for humans and the worthiness of their life to be processed by questions and calculations is more accurate of data? And the result of this then is you see that using these weapons and such a process to compute such decisions is one that has a considerable impact on human dignity. Because is human dignity still fully intact if you're allowing a life to be processed through questions of data, number, whatever is coded into this machine, and for an inanimate object to end up taking this decision? And this has been something that has been flagged, for example, in terms of the special rapporteur on extrajudicial executions and so on, where this question of how the threat to human dignity and an absence of moral agency has also been highlighted. Similarly, just like I said, there is a legal accountability gap, you can also then consider it a moral accountability gap, because who then takes that burden? And tied to the question of a moral accountability gap is my last point under this section, which is that behaviorally and psychologically, distance from killing has been acknowledged as something that has an impact. And it has been looked at in terms of weapons such as drones and so on. So how does that impact that it could have, together with the morality gap, tie into the question of going ahead with autonomous weapons? Finally, to move on to the last bit of my presentation, which is on the debate itself around autonomous weapons. The interesting thing is that ethical arguments have also been made for autonomous weapons, which perhaps some of you also are in agreement with. And perhaps the strongest or most ethical argument for autonomous weapons is that they are more precise, they are more reliable, and that they might therefore enable, better compliance with humanitarian law or human ethical values, because then they would be able to distinguish better, be more precise, and then there would be less adverse consequences for civilians. But here's why I think this does not succeed as an ethical argument. As a first level, everything I already just said in relation to questions of distinction, bias, proportionality, and precaution, all those points mean that the computation of IHL is unable to take place as it should in a way that would comply with the law. And at that level in itself, it means that the argument about greater precision and lesser civilian casualties would not succeed. However, secondly, the other point I would like to make here is that perhaps in a utopian world where we could be assured that all machines would be designed perfectly, it would be completely possible to, translate every principle of humanitarian law and human behavior into a machine. And not just that, where states and armies and non-state actors would only endeavor to use these weapons in such a way that they would perhaps fight themselves and not injure anyone else. In such a world, perhaps that argument could fly. Not to sound too pessimistic, but it is only limited to such a world, at least in relation to me, and here's why. Firstly, the machines, as I mentioned, will not be able to comply with principles of IHL if there is no human involvement involved. So firstly, a clear violation of the principles of IHL. Secondly, as mentioned, autonomous weapons, due to the technology involved, will still carry a real risk of unpredictability. This is not to say that the most evolved version of that technology will not do well, but the fact that battlefields and armed conflicts are also complex places, and there are only so many things you could perhaps account for, and any mistakes in the process will also be in relation to human life. And finally, the fact that a lot of people forget in the debate, which is that autonomous weapons might also just be used for purposes which are illegal, which are, abusive towards civilians, etc. And the last thing I want to flag is that all these points then are made a lot more difficult by what is sometimes referred to as the double black box. I know Professor Kosik referred to the black box in relation to the technology itself, where, it's still a great feat of technology, but you can't necessarily explain what has contributed to the outcome. What I mean by the double black box is that, especially in conflict, we're talking about it in relation to conflict. We're talking about military matters, state matters, and so on. So no one is going to be willing to sit there and put their code out there and say, this is how we did it, this is what is wrong with it. Is there anything wrong with it? We'd never know. And for that reason, what is termed as the double black box makes everything more complicated. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janitra, for that contribution, and I think it expands and complements what we have been talking this whole afternoon about the dangers and the vulnerabilities and the uncertainness about the use of weapons of this nature, as well as the use of the technology. Now, as I said, I want to sharpen this a little because this is not this simple. Real armies might think differently. They have lesser people dying by putting machines. They spend probably less money for war, maybe for developing it. I'm not saying I believe this, I'm just saying that what the bigger armies would be saying, thinking. And therefore, what is it that I want to convince me to go along? I invite Colonel Nalin Herath, who is a distinguished commissioned officer with over 30 years of dedicated service in the Sri Lankan Army. He is currently serving as the Director Media and Spokesman at the Ministry of Defence. He has a master's degree in management from the Sir John Kothalaru Defence University, and postgraduate degrees in human rights from the University of Colombo, and strategic management from the Sir John Kothalaru Defence University, and a certification in international humanitarian law from the University of Leiden, and a global diplomacy certification in diplomacy in modern world from the University of London source. And he also has authored a book, The Globe in a Nutshell. I invite Nalin to kind of, in his presentation, to take into account this dilemma people who actually have these weapons have to consider in not developing and using them. Nalin.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for inviting me for this today's session. So let me put it in this way. I'll just try to get some opening. If we get an organization, we have the human resource department. And in the human resource management subject, it's defined that the human behavior is unpredictable. Because of that, in the organization, you have the human resource department. How you control the behavior of these humans by the human resource department and the leadership, you have a lot of rules, regulations. Then you're trying to have some kind of line to control the behavior of the humans. Now today we are trying to give the decision making process to a machine, and we are asking and we are waiting algorithm to analyze and decide whether this human is going to live or not. So that's the argument, sir. So normally the promoting of IHL is the responsibility of the states. Normally the states are the elements which are dealing with ICRC signing. So non-state actors, they can't have any, but they need to oblige of the IHL, but states, they are the parties who should promote the IHL. So then waging war is it is not decided by a general or commander of the army or CDS or defense secretary. No, it's a political decision. The political decision is executed by the military. It's a different case. Today, there are 120 conflicts are fighting around the world. Out of 120 conflicts, there are 60 non-state actors also involved. Today, I think you understand how the behavior of the non-state actors, especially when it comes to non-state armed groups. Today, non-state armed groups, they are using all artificial intelligence, all the technologies. They have missiles, they have robots, they have drones, the armed drones, everything. It's a different case how they receive it, but they have the technology. I think I don't know whether you have watched the movie Olympus Has Fallen. in the Olympus Has Fallen movie, there is an incident. U.S. Vice President and his PSO, they are doing some fishing, and one of the adverse parties, they are launching swarms of drones to kill the vice president, a non-state actor. So it's very complicated. Today, the AI and technology we are using with the drones. So you must have seen the way normally we always the most prominent two conflicts are happening now. That is Ukraine-Russian conflict, and other one is the Gaza. It has very broad. It has expanded to broad areas, but those are the main two conflicts. So there we have seen how the different parties, varying parties, they are using the technologies, drones, how they are using the drones, armed drones. A lot of technologies involved. And if you talk about how military is using this technology, so especially Israel is doing it very well. So they are very technical savvy. IDF, Israel Defense Forces, technically savvy defense forces, one of the defense forces in the world. So they are get involved the technology, especially AI, for when they are doing the target analysis assessments. So they get involved a lot of artificial intelligence. So based on that algorithm, so it decides what percentage of collateral damage is going to happen for this operation. It may say, okay, 15, 20 civilians will be killed. Then sometimes it may say that, okay, 100 civilians will be killed. So then again, the higher commander they have to involve and decide how you are going to minimize the collateral damage. But if we allow the machine to take that decisions based on the analysis, if we take it for granted, then sometimes it may go wrong. We can't guarantee. And Israel army is using the decision support systems. So because of this artificial intelligence, the decision support, the speed of the decisions, effective decision making, the decision making process has been enhanced. So that is one of the advantages of this using artificial intelligence. Then Ukraine army is using effectively artillery with the AI and artillery, how they are selecting the targets when they are firing artillery rounds. So they are heavily involved this AI technology with their some of the softwares they have developed. It was developed by one of the Ukraine's company itself. So they are heavily get involved. So because of that, they have achieved a lot of effective results. Then other one is cyber and AI. So this can happen in any different domains, maybe on the ground, maybe at sea, maybe at air, maybe at space. So cyber is basically, it is Ukraine and Russian militaries present. Since I am taking this example because it's ongoing conflict, Ukraine and especially Ukrainians, they are heavily get involved AI technology in order to identify sometimes the cyber threats and the potential cyber threats. So that is how they are using it. So they get some kind of strategic advantage because of that reason. And other one is especially we can use this artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to humanitarian affairs. So it can happen during a conflict, or maybe some kind of disaster, or maybe after conflict. So we can get used of this technology for better humanitarian affairs. Then other major conflict is, the major problem is coming with the cyber when it comes to information warfare. So we have seen how information warfare is playing with especially at the beginning of the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Everybody thought that Ukraine won the information warfare. the way they developed different videos, even the way they used the YouTube, they used the media platforms to demoralize Russian military. So different kind of case. They use lot of artificial intelligence and the technology in order to develop these kind of things. So at the initial part, that's how Ukraine gained some kind of advantage at the initiative. So latter part they had some setbacks, but initially they got and everybody thought that Ukraine won the information warfare. And other thing is disinformation and misinformation. So when this is actually, if we talk about a war, it's a serious business. The war is you are going to kill your enemy. You are going to kill your enemy. It's a serious business. The ground commander, military commander, he may be given the objective, the political leadership will give the objective. His objective is to achieve that political decision. So, as a commander, he will be given a lot of options. So, then she talk about the ethical and the ethical side and the principles of IHL. So, as a commander, you will be given all the resources. So, but you have to balance your resources and your objective. This is where military necessity comes. By using the military necessity, you can't justify sometimes your wrong acts. This is what IHL teach. So, if we talk about challenges, this is very complicated because nowadays the state parties as well as non-state armed groups both are active. So, both are using technology. AI, especially the states are trying for autonomous weapon system. But non-state armed groups, they are trying to get other, especially AI-driven machines. Now, other argument is still nuclear weapons have not been banned. We have not been able to ban it. Not a single country wants to ban it. WHO got asked for the opinion of the ICJ, International Court of Justice, but ICJ could not give any opinion because 15 members, 7 was in favor, another 7 was against, another country did not vote. It's pending. So we have been struggling to ban nuclear weapons. So now, again we have this challenge, the artificial intelligence and the autonomous weapon. So will the other active countries, because there are 30 countries that heavily depend on because artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons, because now Russia announced their military is going to be modernized with the artificial intelligence. They want to modernize their military with the artificial driven modernization. At the moment, only one country, they passed the bill in Brazil a couple of days ago. They voted in favor of, because their argument was AI should be regulated. So Brazil passed that law in the parliament. And other thing is lethal autonomous weapons. So lethal autonomous weapons, if you take a machine or robot, especially killer robots, so you just give the autonomy to killer robot to decide. So can killer robot to distinct? If you keep the because most of the conflicts they are fighting in the cities. The future warfare also will be fought in the cities. It means that it's a escalation goes high. The collateral damages are going to be very high. So then if we send a killer robot, if you take a killer robot, I can take it onto my palm, that much small. If you send thousands killer robots to a kind of populated area, how this machine can distinguish between the, maybe a military target or a civilian infrastructure. So today, by having all these laws, we have seen the sufferings, number of civilians dying, and the civilian death toll going up, and the civilian casualties are going up, and the civilian infrastructures heavily damaged after having all these laws. I think before I wind up, I'll just take one example. That is, we have seen some Hollywood movies, some Tamil movies. They have created a kind of by using dead persons. They have created killer robots, killer men, kind of hitmen. So there is one movie that is Born Identity. So one example. There are a number of movies. So that chip is deciding everything. Even though he is a human, he has been programmed. So same thing is happening here. And if you take Rajinikanth movie 2.0, the professor is creating a machine, a robot. Ultimately, what happens was that robot, Rajinikanth is double acting. The same man is falling in love with the professor's girlfriend. And that robot is trying to kill the professor, man who was created, that man who created the robot. That's the story. So this is how it goes. It's very complicated. The technology, as Professor Ajit is always telling, technology is neutral. It is how we use it. So I personally believe technology should be for the betterment of the mankind, for the betterment of the society, not to destruct or fighting with each other. So rest of the things we'll handle during the Q&A session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Nalin. I'm impressed of how much time you seem to be having to be watching movies while wearing all your hats. But thank you for, and this is why I kind of wanted this tension, because that is part of this debate. You can't be just only very liberal and expect things to fall in place. This is a reality. And what Nalin represented here is part of the arguments I heard when I sat with probably the 30 countries you're talking about, who kind of are juggling on why they don't want a preemptive ban. Now another client of sorts, not in the same vein maybe, who have concerns about preemptive banning, and that's what we are kind of talking about, and that is the goal of the disarmament community to see, and the humanitarian law community to see that it happens. And my only task here is to narrow this gap to the point of how can you finally make it happen. Because you can't make it happen necessarily by saying how morally wrong it is, or that it violates this law or that law, because if so, we shouldn't have been fighting wars. So you have to sometimes deal with the concerns of these clients, as I call them. And client number 2, which I have Ajit representing here, is the scientist. And one of the big arguments some countries would raise when you have discussions relating to, in my time we called it laws, today autonomic weapon systems and artificial intelligence, is that this is all dual technology. If you stop the research, you stop both. Ajit, will you try to decipher that a little. But we just introduce Ajit before that. He too wears many hats. He is the Chief Innovation Officer of the National Innovation Agency. But his real day job is he's a chemical engineer his day job is being the Chief Innovation Officer, but he is a senior professor of chemical and process engineering in the University of Moratuwa. He received his PhD from Cambridge, has worked at the University of Reading and the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He has an MBA from the Postgraduate Institute of Management, Sri Javardhanapura, and he was the president of Pugwash, Sri Lanka, 2020 to 23. Ajit?
Thank you. Yeah, I think when it was invited, I'm an outlier here in a way, but justification, science, technology, and innovation, perhaps. The topic that we are talking about is like autonomous weapon systems and AI. I would really look at it like autonomous systems and AI as the two broad areas that we are talking about, and then you hit the dual nature of anything, right? You have weaponized the autonomous system, you have the autonomous weapon systems. You can weaponize AI as well in a way that you can use it against. So there's always the dual nature of technology. That's what we are seeing. And what I remember, what I see from kind of like growing up, I used to grow up with reading Captain W. Jones, and Biggers was a hero of my life, right? And that's is First World War and all that at the time. But what you should understand is perhaps 1903, when the Wright brothers came up with the flying machine, right? The humans giving that flight, but not too afterwards. I mean, within about 10 years, we were bombing each other. Even before, really, we were flying from place A to place B, or the travel or the tourism. We were more so using that as a weapon. We weaponized that human ability to flight faster than perhaps visiting distant friends and trying to make, connections. So this dual nature is very much there, and I think, so to me, what I see is, we really, on the other hand, I need to talk about the legality and so on. That also poses a question, going back into something like, is it that we want to have war, but we want to fight things in a way that we find comfortable with? If something goes wrong, we can identify who to be blamed or who to be held responsible. If that wish is fulfilled, are we okay with the war? In a way, I think that's the argument that we have been talking, right? Because that's the loophole that we have been looking at in this system. How can I apportion blame to this machine? How can I apportion or try to find who is responsible in the absence of putting the responsibility onto somebody or something? We don't like to put that in something, because the machine, we see, okay, we can't hold her responsible. So let's look at it and do something about this. But to me, I would say, going back into why was in the first place, right? And probably we have now grown up in such a way, we understand a lot. And I think it's high time that we move away from that, the reptilian brain instincts that more or less we get in, to the much more philosophical, the humanity side of it, understanding why we are humans, and not fighting for territory, and evolve ourselves to that higher order of living, and try to look at, okay, do we need any of these things? Just to say, now just look at, if you take ICRC and also look at the UN Secretary General, I am pretty sure with UN Secretary General, he's going to run out of adjectives to describe the current predicament of the planet. He's talking about, we have opened the Hell's Gate, right? We have a climate disaster, red alert, and all the very strong adjectives we're using to show that we have a planetary crisis. And it's very interesting with new technology. Just imagine the two conflicts that we are talking about. If you take the Russian and the Ukraine one front, the calculation for carbon emissions, right? We have talking about 170 million metric tons of carbon emissions have taken out so far. Now Sri Lanka at this stage, we have about 22 billion metric tons per year. We're a very poor emitter in a sense, right, per capita. But taken as a country, we are doing this much. But it's about 9 Sri Lanka's emissions have now been done by the Ukraine-Russia war, right? In addition, Sri Lanka is also doing that. So we have 10 additional 9 country burden has been now imposed on this planet, right? Which is what you're talking. And in the first 2 months calculations for the Israel-Gaza conflict, you're talking about the emissions from about 20 climate vulnerable countries. This is just 2 months one. Now we're going over 1 year, right? 20 climate vulnerable in the sense that we have this issue, right? The most recent disaster reduction report from UN talks about, which all the countries signed up, almost all the countries signed up, US didn't, in the Paris, right? To get it to the 1.5, I mean, we are going to hit the 1.5. So we should be in a very much downward trajectory looking at where we should be in time to come. And we talk about net zero and zero emissions, net emissions, all that. But the report that is coming out is talking about 3.2 degrees rise. So these 20 vulnerable countries, Pacific Islands, small islands, Maldives, for instance, would be no more, right? They would be no more with 2 degrees. 3.2 degrees, certainly going to be no more. So we have this bigger issue, right? So we are using technology and we are fighting wars and we are pushing the planet into peril at a faster speed. So I suppose these are days and age where we talk about if you have a problem, yes, at one time it was laws and wars. And we also say now today, we can do it hashtag. The change can be brought in through hashtag, right? May not exactly, the hashtag is not that powerful in Sri Lanka. But the concept is we can have a social dialogue or a social pressure and try to demonstrate for change. And if we want, the war is not should be the primary mechanism of settling an argument. We can look at collaboration, discussion and pushing, and the new technology opens up the avenue. So that's why I would say AI and autonomous systems, because where we can do a lot of things with that. But the moment you weaponize, which seems to be the wrong thing that we should address, so we should address it in a broader way. The weaponizing or this dual nature of the technologies should never be held against the human. That should be the way now it should be, right? The humanity should prevail by respecting the human in its all forms. There is no such thing as probably now balancing priorities. Because what we should realize today, as evolved species to a greater extent, that we should not be having these conflicts in the first place, right? The conflicts should be avoided. And these technologies offers us that opportunity to do greater things. But we are achieving the wrong results by using some fantastic technologies, right? So I suppose that's the way we should be looking at, not looking at this banning per se on an aspect of a technology, which I think, as Colonel Lalin was talking about, there's always these rogue scenarios. And then you're pressed to, I mean, you can't fight sometimes with your hands tied and so on, right? The technology is being utilized. Technology will move on and somebody can weaponize it. But we should get into a platform of ensuring that this control, and I can always talk about like the Joseph Rotblat, right? He walked out of the Manhattan Project for being ethically feeling that what you are engaging in is not right, right? The Einstein-Russell Manifesto came in the pugwash, leading to the pugwash, because of this understanding, trying to look at, right, get into the nuclear. Einstein realized that have created a monster in a sense. But we know where we can use with nuclear power. So I suppose there has to be that direction where we should be pushing for that change on the leadership. Because one of the problems with scientists and the technologists, not the problem with science and technologists, we will pursue development. We will pursue its human ingenuity. We are curious. We want to do new things, right? The AI is moving towards, we are talking about singularity in time to come. 2030, 2029, we are talking about singularity. That is, the machines that we create will surpass the abilities of the human brain, right? I suppose that run will continue. It's just that how do you manage it without affecting us, our own existence? That's something to be thanked. It's not, probably not taking small element at a piecemeal and looking at it. I think we should understand the greater issue. So, I mean, I see with AI, right? For instance, I think we have this excellent, not a good example, but an example of going back to one of the first Iran-Iraq war. There was a US carrier, I think, where you shot the Iranian flight, 566 or which killed about 290 civilians. What's the reason? It was a state-of-the-art Asian battle system, right? I won't say it's autonomous, but it is of a right. You have a recognition. You then fire, right? The identification of a civilian plane, civilian flight was mistook for an F-14 Iranian fighter jet. Now with AI I'm pretty sure that civilian flight and a distinction between an F-14 and a civilian flight, I'm pretty sure should be able to distinguish. It should have been, so the algorithmic error is not likely to have happened if there was good AI in that. But it was human error was so serious. 290 people shot down, assuming that this is a fighter plane when it was a civilian flight, right? It's a US missile carrier. So I suppose you can always go on sharpening the technology and sharpening the technology height. But if we have in our mind that we have to resort to fights to solve conflicts, then we'll go on using the advanced versions and all the ways, and we will come up with. So I suppose how do you go back? Because Homo sapiens, right? You all talk about very nicely at the opening sentence of his book Nexus. He speaks of Homo sapiens, the wise man. And we are supposed to be intelligent human beings. Why we are so self-destructive? And what we are doing is we are using being wise, but we are more or less pushing that for being self-destructive. So on the planet side, all these conflicts are adding a significant amount of emissions, accelerating our demise for sure. We are talking about 2030 and 2050. We have to act fast, right? And which we are not doing. And on the other hand, in itself, we need to work on like AI. Even with AI today, it's very interesting, right? When we are talking about innovation, we look at the supercomputing facilities of the nations. We look at the robot population of nations. It's a yardstick of strength, right? So when we calculate the global innovation index, we look at those things, supercomputing facility. What's also interesting, when we have AI, I mean, there's huge amount of energy which we most of the time don't realize being consumed. And today, if you take the data centers 24/7, 365, we're talking about 2.5 to 3.2% of the GHG emissions of the world is now coming from these data centers. Cryptocurrency eats energy. Blockchain systems, right? And so that is more than this about 3% is much more than the GHG emissions of the entire aviation industry. Not military, both. So we have now, the technology is also having its own scenarios that we need to now understand, unravel, to have green supercomputing. Those are the challenges and the conflicts I think we should be working on, right? And so I suppose there has to be this thing. Politics is a case of priorities, and priorities come from history, and these are set by politicians. I suppose we need to come on to a kind of like the human argument that let's be humans, and today we know so much, and we know about each other and how to work on together, that war should not be a resort at all, not even a last resort, right? So this is, I was asking from Colonel Nali in the issue, right? I mean, like country like Sri Lanka, can we think of a race of looking at this technology, and can we ever come into this type of situation? Or I mean, like saying, okay, we equipped our army to that level, go on, but we'll always maybe playing a catch-up game, and it's not going to be helpful either. Now, to me, an example is like Costa Rica, where they said, look, 1949, right, just 1 year after our independence, they decided, from a constitutional point, no military, right? They became the first country in the world to stop a military and put that money into healthcare and education. And now there are about few more countries have joined Costa Rica. It looks so sensible. It may not be at that time, but they still have had no conflict with Panama on the other side and so on borders. So it's probably a way to go for some, and maybe that's the type of scenario that we should be pushing, rather than looking at these weapon systems and how to, I don't know, I would think that, again, going back to a little bit of a concepts of pugwash, where we are talking about social responsibility of scientists and the researchers. Can we have globally organizations looking at the whistleblowing opportunity at a global scale, right? I suppose a whistleblower was taken a couple of days back, right? In one conflict. The point is, can we do it like that, where you move out of, like what I was talking about, the Joseph Rotblat, moving out with conscious that what I'm engaged is not right. So intentional wrong algorithms, if you are engaged in coding that, I identify and come out and say, look, it's not going to be good. You need people to be alert enough to this is what is wrong, because researchers will work on, and that need to be looked at. But it should be not by law. It should be while thinking like, should I by channeling my resources into that? Because what happens is the leadership sometimes see power in some of these opportunities. Researcher develops a technology. A political leader believes in power through that technology. We have nations heads saying, right, who leads in AI field actually leads in the power. Heads has the hold of the power. This is, I'm going off statement of one country. And again, another country that recently said, from our neighbor said, that who has power over data rules the world. So data is new fuel, right? So, and the point is, we should understand that. But if you use that understanding for the greater good, life will become better. Otherwise, we have always the option of running out in this wrong direction. So I'll stop there in that, with that.
Thank you very much, Professor Ajit. And, so we have had three very compelling presentations following Andre. And as I come back to Andre, I'm not going to introduce him again. I want you to, while kind of maybe picking on some of the issues which have been raised and contextualizing it with this idea of a preemptive ban and what it's going to do and the feasibility of it, to also give us some sense of, there's only one instance, if I recall, where a preemptive ban has happened, and that is on Protocol 4, 1980. Times were different, right? And you probably can't compare the world in 1980 with today, but I'm not sure was Reagan president at the time, or was it before Carter's time? I suspect it might be Carter's time. So it might be interesting to look at what compelled nations on that issue to come to a preemptive ban, because that might in some way approximate circumstances one could think of which might make a nation, a state which has military power, has scientific power. And I must just add one more point when I say this. In talking to these countries in CCW, trying to bring them around a table just to open a discussion on the IGG. I had three categories. I classify people as three categories. There were some who said, we must ban, it's wrong, and all that. So that was a very clear group. On the other hand, there were others who said, no, 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 we are not going to do it, so don't go there. There was a third category of countries which I would call ones who genuinely felt they would be losing out on dual technology and had no interest or intention of militarizing this capacity. And I saw others who hid behind those who said no. So I think the world to me at that point could be divided into four categories. So it is because of this that to carry a convention to ban this weapon, we will have to carry everybody along. We have done things outside the UN, of course, outside these processes. And I want Janitra to come to that later. What if it doesn't work, what happens? Because there are people already concerned about it, and the Landmines Convention didn't come through an intergovernmental process. The cluster munitions didn't come through an intergovernmental process. You created it, and then you got people to come around. The nuclear ban treaty didn't come out. It had opposition. It was not unanimous. So what I'm trying to say is, and so that it's in that context that I throw the question to you: what compelled Protocol 4 to come about, and are there lessons to be learned from that to our effort right now to look at autonomous weapon systems?
Thank you, sir. Well, a lot of pressure, I have to say. And yeah, understanding that we are already a little bit behind the time, and what we have,
No, that's okay. I think we are okay.
we have to have questions and answers, so I'm going to ask questions rather than to give answers. Thank you very much. So first, let's put a little bit more clarity here. No one say that autonomous weapon systems should be banned. No one say artificial intelligence should be banned. So it's not about that. That's about the specific technologies that are used in a specific way to kill people. So it's not about banning the technology, because indeed it gives a lot of good things as well. So it's about actually banning the way the technologies are designed. So what we are talking about autonomous weapon systems. And when we talk about the ICRC position, ICRC says we need to prohibit unreliable autonomous weapon systems that you don't know what would be the outcome of its attack, whether it will be able to distinct and all the principles that have been mentioned today, or anti-personal, because it's not ethical, because humanitarian considerations, and etc. So that's what we are talking if we talk about the position of the ICRC on AWS. And I also promised to explain why it's lethal autonomous weapon systems in the GGE and why we talk about autonomous weapon systems. And that was perfectly summarized by Professor saying that adjectives is an issue. We don't like the adjectives, because each and every lawyer knows if you want to make something unclear, you just add an adjective. Autonomous weapon system, lethal autonomous weapon system. Non-lethal? To which extent lethal? 90% lethal? So it's immediately become a gray zone. And you know, the impression is that there are non-lethal autonomous weapon systems that can be used against people. The same impression we had when we've heard about the non-lethal weapon. Probably you've heard this term. These tiny anti-personal mines, which do not kill, well, just injure. Just injure. And we can spread them in millions, injuring millions of civilians. Whether the damage is non-lethal and it's okay? No. So it deviates from the discussion on the subject. That's why we don't use lethal in the ICRC, we use autonomous weapon systems to make the subject a little bit more clear. But coming back to what has been said, perfectly said by the colleagues, my question to you, so who is responsible for IHL to be developed, for actually the creation of IHL and for IHL to be applied to new technologies. Who are they? What are they? States. This has been said many times today. States are responsible. 192 UN state members are responsible. 196 states, quasi-states, parties to Geneva Conventions are responsible for the implementation of the convention and ensuring that the rules are respected. And when the rules are not respected, what they should do? They have to be very vocal about that. And that's a clear obligation enshrined in international law on this. The problem of autonomous weapon system, of new weapon systems, is not only the technology itself. What we see from the past, the First World War, what actually oiled the First World War? The progress. 50 years before, you had to have 2 lines of people with rifles shooting 1 shoot per minute. Beginning of 20th century, you have machine gun. 1,000 bullets per minute. You have artillery. You have warships. You have so many technologies that nations started to believe that they are so advanced, so much more advanced than others, that while beginning the war, they will prevail. And that was something that oiled the war, the First World War, a lot. If you would look into the memoirs, they were like convinced 100% that we will prevail. Germans were convinced that probably we will not prevail in the sea because British are a little bit better, but we will definitely prevail on the land, and etc. And the vice versa. And this didn't fly, as you know, because the technologies quite soon became available to all the parties to the conflict. And it ended with the application of gas weapon, the deadly application of gas weapon. Probably you know about the case of Ypres. Then, Second World War happened. UN was created. What was promised to the smaller states? Why actually that's my question. Why so many states joined the UN? Isn't it crazy to give the power to 5 states in Security Council to decide everything? Everything. Isn't it crazy? Why smaller states went there, joined that? Because they were promised something. What it was? It was Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, non-use of force. It has been said, no, the force will be not used between states anymore unless there is a decision of Security Council or Article 51, self-defense, collective self-defense. 3. Only 3 cases. Period. What we've had, whether that was enough, whether that worked this way. Well, I have doubts on this. Then, today what we have the situation when we have pagers, which blows up. We have phones that blows up. Are you sure that you want to have a robot next to you, which can attack you because of cyber attack that will come? Is it something that we want to use and design specifically to be used against the people, in an anti-personal way? That's again a question that I would like to put forward here. The humanitarian aspect. Today we paid a lot of attention to ethical aspects, which very important, to legal aspects. Humanitarian, when we talk about humanitarian aspects, we think about the humanitarian consequences. If the technology will fail, how many lives we will lose? What is the potential of human cost of cyber technologies, of autonomous weapon systems? They are really high. So this cannot be ignored. That's something that needs to be on the scale of decision-making process. This kind of new paradigms, new types of weapon, they change a lot the very way the armed conflicts can be organized or can go. For smaller states, those which are not that much advanced in technologies, just thinking from the political perspectives, what it would mean if those states who are able to invest a lot into robotics, into artificial intelligence, into autonomous weapon systems, would get these technologies, and these technologies will be not limited the way to be used in the battlefield, and not necessarily respect IHL the way IHL prescribes them to be respected. Another aspect, humanitarian aspect again. My question to you, actually. 1812, Napoleon I, Borodino battle. and Napoleon III. 1858 Solferino battle. Two Napoleons, 40 something, like 50 years between them. In your opinion, in which situation the chance of combatants, wounded combatants, to survive was higher? During Napoleon I or during Napoleon III? Let's vote. If you think that that's Napoleon I, please raise your hands. Thank you. If this is Napoleon III, please raise your hands. And the whole room abstained. Okay. So I'll give you the answer. Napoleon, well, technically it should be Napoleon III, right? Because the technology is developed and everything developed and it's already the middle of 19th century. But I'll tell you that the ratio is much, much in favor of Napoleon I. And I'll tell you why. During the Napoleon's wars and before, it was a custom, humanitarian, like, if you want, like humanitarian consideration, that the hospital line was just next to the front line, very close to the front line. And commanders exchanged the place of it so it not to be attacked. Then we had about 40 years of like time without wars in Europe. Many officers grown up, generals who never ever fight. And they forgot about this. And this is in literature, that's not what I'm inventing now. And Napoleon III, they didn't know this. And what they did, they decided that it would be a good idea to hide the hospitals far from the front line, so them not to be attacked, not to suffer from the occasional attack. And now imagine the battle. The battle is going. Deficits of everything, of horses, it's a mass, full mass. And now you need to evacuate the wounded combatants, like 30 kilometers somewhere far away. It can't be done. So that's why Henri Dunant in 1858, while witnessing Battle of Solferino, was so shocked by 50,000 people laying in the battlefield without proper assistance, without proper help. And this is something that changes, that something happened that changed this humanitarian perspective. And each new technology that revolutionates the way the war is waged is something that has this high significant impact that can change everything. So, referencing to states, when we talk about the states and their understanding of IHL, not to forget that while applying, they interpret IHL. They need to understand what IHL means. For that, they created a number of tools. Article 31st, 32nd of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties give this quite clear understanding of how they have to interpret the rules. Despite that, we see that they interpret that very different ways. ICRC makes input to ensure that at least IHL is interpreted more or less clear way. We have two publications. One is Customary IHL, which accumulates the practice of interpretations by states. Another one is Updated Commentaries to Geneva Conventions. And I urge, because we will not be able to discuss everything today, to look into these documents to see what is the interpretation that ICRC brings. And the last but not least, the future. And on this I have the following. First, indeed, there is an initiative in the air. It has been already articulated, and it will fly. And in 2 years, we have a high chance to have a legally binding instruments on AWS. What exactly it will ban, what kind of weaponization of this technology, that's for states to decide. Again, states. That's for them to decide. ICRC, as always, is close by, assisting, drafting the documents, so we are there. TPN nuclear weapon has been mentioned. As an example, that the technology cannot be banned, that the weapon probably will not be banned, or it's very complicated to ban this kind of technologies. But I'll tell you something. Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapon was adopted in 2017. From the perspectives of international law, it's like yesterday, like literally yesterday. When there was an instrument at Ottawa Convention on landmine ban was articulated, many states said it will not go. Just because, you know, there are so many landmines in the world. But now, what we have? more than a half states in the world are parties. We have demined millions of square kilometers in the world, reducing significantly the number of civilians injured by landmines. TPNW, when it was adopted, well, it was quite clear in the air that many states were saying, no way, never, never ever. 3 years after, just 3 years after having more than 50 participants, the treaty became in force. Now we are coming to 100 states exceeding or ratifying the convention or signing the convention. And this creates a huge part of the world without nuclear weapon, without transit, without like full ban. And let's wait a little bit. Let's give the chance to the legal instrument. Who knows how it will evolve in 20 years when we will have robots, killers, or whatever, or probably other technologies. We don't know. So my take here is that we need to go by all the fronts possible, limiting technologies if possible, through the technological means as well, through the legal means, thinking and talking about the ethics, gathering those who's like-minded, those who are open to the new technologies, pushing the civil society as well to be vocal on this, on all these issues. I'm not talking now from the name of the ICRC. ICRC is a very, very, like, let's say, the organization that works very confidentially with the parties to the conflicts. But for all of us, this is a one objective. This is a one objective, demilitarization, because it leads to the better future, and including those future that is covered by the mandate of the ICRC. And the last phrase that I would like to share with you. Indeed, the technologies are neutral. I fully agree with this. But Anton Chekhov, the famous Russian author who actually used to be in Sri Lanka in his life, he said a very interesting phrase. If you have a rifle in the beginning of play, be sure that at the end of the play, the rifle will shoot. So if we invest into autonomous weapon systems today, without those limitations that would make them reasonable, be sure there will be a day when they will be used the way that we will all consider not the right one. So I don't know whether I fulfilled my task, but thank you very much. I would like to thank all the panelists and you for your patience. Thank you.
I want to thank my panelists very profusely. I don't think I've sat through sessions in this chair for the last 1.5 years. I've had such an attentive audience ever. I think we brought every chair we could bring into this place. There are a few seats in front, but in the back they've been scrambling to find every chair. So thank you all of you for coming, and I think it's I mean, when we intended this, I don't know whether we expected the interest and the attention to be so much. So thank you for ICRC, and I think you should be very happy that we could get this attention for the last event of your 75th anniversary. Now, I think the debate is very well poised, and I have deliberately sharpened the edges so that this is a debate. I'm sure it's much more interesting than the UN Security Council's discussion, which I can imagine how it's going, or when it goes. Right? Maybe they should tune into this. But let's get some questions. I want to come to Vidya and Udani when they are ready, because both of them have authored material which has been substantive contributions in broader disarmament and in lethal autonomous weapon systems. But let's go broader first. Yes. Yes. Please introduce yourself and take a mic.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much to all. I'm Karine Buzot. I work from the French Embassy on a project here in maritime safety. And it's not in that quality that I'm intervening, but more as a maybe tech enthusiast as well. I'd like to preface what I'm saying by what I'm gonna ask and say by saying that I do truly believe in IHL, and I want to make sure that this is not against me, but I will probably be advocating for the devil a little. I just wanted to make first two comments saying that maybe it could have been interesting to clarify a bit more on the different type of technologies we're talking about, because I think it's important to understand there's also a difference between general AI, machine learning, and programming, which comes in the degree of autonomy that we give to the machine to make decisions, and in terms of the autonomy of the decision process of something that is not human. And in that regard, I was actually wondering if it was possible to have a bit more clarification on the notion of unpredictability of weapon and the impact that it has. Are we talking about a lack of discrimination when the machine is maybe targeting something, like the capacity of the machine to discriminate between a human, a combatant, a non-combatant, etc.? Or are we talking of unpredictability in the sense of the fact that we don't understand the process of decision making by the machine? Because in that case, it was mentioned by one of the panelists that humans are also very unpredictable in their decision making. Professor, you did mention a family event, and I mean, this person, by not obeying the orders, took maybe a somehow unpredictable decision for at least the state system, which in that case was a positive one. So this is my question actually. So how do you consider unpredictability of the weapon as the issue there and take it into account? Thank you very much.
Yeah, just to sorry? Yes, Lasanda Gurukula Surya. I'm a journalist, a freelance journalist. Yeah, to talk about something a bit more concrete, what is happening in the world today. Now we see, it was mentioned, the case of this genocidal war in Gaza. Now, this has been going on over a year. And we have the Israeli spokespersons come on television, on Western television and media and so on, and they say Israel is not breaking the laws of war. Now, how is this explained? Is it something to do with? Is it that the law, there is a gap in the law and it does not deal with artificial intelligence? Because I mean, it would appear that, I think the Colonel also said, it is already being used. Artificial intelligence is being used. So is the problem here that they're able to happily talk about we are not breaking the laws of war? Is it because of this? That's one. The other question I have is, when you talk about autonomous weapon systems, does it include the area of artificial intelligence in intelligence gathering and in surveillance? Because now there is the example that comes to mind is, it was reported maybe about a year ago that in South Sudan, the militant group, non-state actor, had acquired a highly sophisticated Israeli spyware. It was highly secretive, the transfer. So, so it is being used, as the Colonel said. So does it appear that non-state actors have a advantage because, they can buy this stuff over the counter? I mean, actually the question is whether you are including, whether ICRC is including also intelligence and surveillance, use of AI in warfare.
Good evening to the panel. My name is Chandrika Manamendra. So with respect to, I'm from the Attorney General's Department. I'm an apprentice at the moment. So a lot to do with IHL in general is with how war is executed, and duties are placed on what weapons are used and how things are done during war. With artificial intelligence, a lot of focus was brought to the attention by the panel with respect to the development of AI and how we apply it. So do you think it is maybe time that IHL also looks at the development of weapons in and of it themselves and the responsibilities we must impose on researchers with respect to how weapons are developed, how technologies are utilized, whether we put certain obligations on them rather than simply focusing on the execution of these technologies in the war place, so to speak? Thank you. And of course, if possible, to also address the obligations that private entities must have with respect to research and their applications on the wars and war space and how military secrets and that sort of thing. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Nushra Vedsingha. I'm a lecturer at SLIIT and currently working as an external researcher for the Oxford University. So I did my PhD in AI, so that's why I want to ask this question from a technical background. So my question is followed with the opinion to set the background and ask a question. So according to the extensive research that we have done in AI, so I want to go to, I think, Miss Yanitra's question, sorry. Yeah. So she specifically mentioned where a child raises a gun, and there can be a problem where the model can detect this as a threat. So there can be situations like that, but it can be mitigated. There's a probability of mitigating it. Like if you, like in biomedical engineering, we have these legal structures where we like use validation processes using different architectures. Like let's say there's this technique called ensemble modeling, where you have different models which will be looking at the problem in different aspects and take final decision. So, but these architectures, they are legally validated, even when we are publishing as well. So my first question is that, is there a proper legal infrastructure for this thing? Then my second question is, like, let's say, yes, there can be ambiguities, like uncertainties, problematic situations where the model cannot be detected. So I wouldn't use these autonomous weapons, but you can go for semi-autonomous, where you get these unpredictable situations, right? Unpredictable situations where you can involve human decisions as well. So the model understands, okay, I'm in an unpredictable state. Should I take this weapon and kill a person, or should I ask a different human opinion to take this decision? So are there any like legal infrastructures for that to enforce those regulations to these systems? And last question is will be a small opinion, because like if you take AI is a logical thinker. It's not emotional thinkers, they are logical thinkers, and it allows you to see in a different way, a numerical way into a problem. So I think in a war, more the information you get more smarter, and you have a higher chance to win this war. So if you are looking in this problem in different manner, different vision, different way of acquisition that data, so if you can use new data analytics technologies before deploying to verify, now you mentioned that there's a black box, but now there are data analytical tools that we can unveil these mysteries inside this this black box. So you can bring up rules and regulations, whether the people who are constructing these, if there are rules right now, you can mention, but you can bring up these rules. So these are my questions. Thank you.
Let's go to this side. Yes. Malinda. Yeah.
My name is Malinda Migoda. I'm with Verite Research. I just want to ask Yanitra, you talked about distinction, but I wonder if there's a issue with thinking about this issue as a technical challenge to be overcome, because what we see also in the civilian space, if you look at like autonomous cars, for example, a sector which has far more oversight in terms of the regulatory framework, where there are instances of, in terms of where accidents have occurred, at the last moment they've switched off their AI to absorb responsibility. Now, I'm just thinking about like, there's of course the issue of distinction, proportionality, all of that, but also when you look at like a government or like a state's decision to go to war, and and during the process of a conflict, the demoralization also happens when the body bags start coming in, right? Now, do you think that the use of autonomous weapons, where a government will be able to say that, oh, we can minimize the casualties amongst our military forces, will that increase the propensity for governments to engage in conflict? Because that's one issue. And then my second question is about talking about the existing debates that's happening with the GGE, and what I've heard is there's already some frustration about the slow progress, and what lessons can we learn from the issue of nuclear disarmament arena, where we basically gave too much space space for nuclear weapon states to disarm on their own terms under Article 6 of the NPT, which led to about 2 decades of frustration amongst the civil society organizations and NGOs, which ultimately led to the nuclear ban treaty. So what lessons can we learn so that we can not repeat the same mistakes in terms of nuclear disarmament within laws?
Okay, I think, 1 minute. I think there have been some very heavy, serious questions, and I think it will do injustice to let those get lost. So, Andre, would you and Janitra have some quick responses, if you can, briefly to some of those issues which came up?
Thank you very much. Well, a lot of questions indeed. I will not be able to answer everything, so just something that I feel very important here in the room. First, thank you very much. Indeed, the time frame doesn't allow to go deeper into the technologies. The main idea that I want to highlight here today is that if we talk about the artificial intelligence, we quite well in the majority of cases we reference to so-called neural networks. So, and that's the technology that allows us to absorb, let's say, 1 million pictures of something, then process it through the specific algorithm, and then at the end, when you show a picture, it gives you probability. It says, okay, I've seen 1 million pictures of cats, now we give a dog, so the system tells you, okay, it's 70% cat, 77 dog, 12 cow, etc. So, and then, because you have already the high level probability, you put the threshold like, okay, 99% probability, it's good enough, so that's a decision made. And then it gives you the decision. The problem here, and there was a word logic used, indeed, from the perspective of technicians, there is a logic there, but it's a different logic from the logic that we had in the past, when the processors used to work in binary mode, ones and zeros, and it was super clear to see the whole algorithm. Now they are as well ones and zeros, but the problem is that we cannot disassemble the algorithm. We cannot understand, we cannot explain, no one would explain how out of this 1 million pictures and the one that you've shown, it came to the conclusion that it's 99% someone or something. And here we have the problem, because if there is never 100%, then the mistake will cost a human life. With 1 million people fighting, with ratio of 50% mistakes, you will have, let's say, 500,000 mistakes. With an unlimited quantity of robots, whatever autonomous weapon systems, that make 1% mistake, you could have many more mistakes. And this is the problem here, on the top of all other ethical and other issues. So, and there's always this argue between, lyrics and physics. So engineers, they very believe in technologies, they very believe that everything can be described, everything can be programmed, etc., etc., etc. Many of them are not very successful in personal life. Why? Well, because of many things. Because not at the moment, at least, it's not really possible to do the things that are theoretically possible. The same with lyrics, who know probably a lot about the poetry and how to meet and date. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the life in a more structured way in the family, they also fail. So it's like the truth is somewhere in the middle. So I apologize for this kind of analogies. So, and responsibilities of the researchers. Great idea, but with this kind of restrictions, we would not have nuclear energy, we would not have the theory, Einstein theory, etc., etc., I believe. So this is kind of a problem. And then I have another very interesting question that I also would like to take about the unpredictability. Indeed, this is a very interesting question. So ICRC considers unpredictability mainly as an indiscriminate effect. So it's mainly about not being able to follow the main principles of IHL, to discriminate between the objects, so to distinct. And then there is another very important issue here as well, is proportionality. The proportionality principle says that any attack should be stopped if there is no military advantage that justifies the collateral damage, and that the collateral damage would be proportionate to this military advantage. Why it's important? Not only because it stops the attacks, that's disproportionate, but because it says each system that makes a decision should have two elements. The one, to understand the military advantage, and the second one, to see clearly, to calculate the collateral damage. These are two important elements. And whether AI is able to do that, that's also a question. So not to talk much about that. GGE, well, yes, GGE, we've seen many times that states, well, the discussion is on political level, and the states are many in numbers. They are not ready to underline and to make the decisions about the binding rules. So they split into groups. We've seen this many times, and probably this will be the case. There were a lot of other interesting questions, but I would like my colleagues also to have chance to respond.
Thank you. I will, as much of my handwriting as I can get down, I will answer, and I'll start backwards with Malinda's question first. And since we just spoke about the GGE, yes, I completely agree in terms of the CCW. There is a lot of frustration also because of how the forum is constituted in terms of consensus. But it has helped, I think, that the discussion has also moved a lot more heavily into the UNGA in terms of the recent resolutions and so on. The last the revote of L77 had 166 states in favor, and just the fact that the UNGA is a more inclusive forum in that sense, I think is progress in some ways. In terms of and this also ties to what Ambassador Ravinatha asked me earlier as well. But in terms of moving on, I think that's all I can speak to right now, really. But I would also rely on the fact that one thing for, I think, every stakeholder involved to remember is that IHL still continues to apply regardless. And this argument that sometimes comes up that in the absence of an explicit treaty, you don't have laws doesn't exist, because the laws that already exist in humanitarian law can also be used for this. And just to a brief nod to the question Professor Kozik answered on unpredictability, I think in terms of distinction, and you said, or in terms of decision-making process, I think based on what weapon it is, it could be both, really. And in terms of the clarification, this is my personal clarification, I don't speak on behalf of an institution, but in relation to what tech or what makes it autonomous, how I would look at it is, again, similar to the ICRC definition, where you have a weapon or a machine that is targeting and making decisions on injury or life and death by itself. There is no meaningful human control at that point itself. And there was another question on that. I'll come back to that. And there was another question about should IHL look at the development of weapons itself from the back? I think it already does. Article 36, if I'm not mistaken, talks about you need to ensure that any weapon that you develop is already in compliance with IHL. So that safeguard is already built into the system as well. Then the question about the example of the child that I gave, and how AI is a logical thinker in that sense. So the thing is this: I completely agree in terms of how coding can happen, AI can work, and the logic within it. But two things. One is, so the child with the gun is one example. Are we assured of the fact that we, when programming it, can ensure every single example such as that would crop up in war? Because that is independent of the competence of the technology itself, right? That is one. And the second thing is that I completely agree with data analytics helping with decisions and so on. However, with a lot of tech coming in here, it's still correlation and not causation, right? It's refined correlation. And are we then still able to make decisions on life and death based on correlation and not causation? Although, of course, human inference of causation could also be complicated, to say the least. And the last one, which ties into another comment I wanted to make as well, was Malinda's question about will it the fact that drones are more easily accessible, less expense, I think it was that, whether it would reduce the propensity for warfare, essentially.
Actually
Increase
the propensity for warfare, because what the civilian, like in terms of say autonomous car makers say that, we can reduce it to an acceptable level of risk where the accidents are far lower than if a human were to be behind the wheel, and if the same excuses can be then used by governments to say look, the damages and to civilian life is acceptable and it's below a certain threshold.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with that comment. Also, there's the fact that I wanted to also bring in the fact that a lot of our conversation today in terms of autonomous weapons being, it replaces the human body, it is safer, it allows those thresholds to change. If you're looking at the advantages of not having a human soldier there, you also have those advantages in drones. But around the debate on autonomous weapons, we tend to kind of forget that because we are looking at just the question of autonomy itself. I'll wrap up my responses.
Yeah, thank you. I think I didn't respond fully to the question that has been asked, and the question is brilliant. Whether there is a proper legal infrastructure for the programming and to ensuring. No and yes. So that's why we are lawyers, and that's why people pay us money, right? So it depends, they say. So look, from one perspective, there is a clear set of rules. The problem is that in order to apply the rule, you need to have information, you need to have knowledge, you need to have skills, and you need to have the interpretation that comes not from the practice as well, but from the practice of the whole life. That's what we call ethics. That's one thing. So sometimes I think it's just impossible to simplify it to the algorithm. So anyway, that's why AI might be great, much better than the algorithm A and B, because they indeed make think wider. But that's where we have the devil as well, the possibility of mistakes. The other thing here is, again, the example that I've given, the small context or narrow context and large context. And so if you feed an eye with specific information, it will always look through this information, through these lenses. So if you would say you never gave the AI a picture of a beaver, he will consider beaver a dog, a cat, something, because the decision needs to be taken. It's super complicated that AI would think, oh no, probably I'm not sure what it is, I need to call someone. It's if we will have these technologies already in the battlefield, there will be a problem. And there was a question about AI. This is just a comment. IHL doesn't regulate everything. Like espionage, for example, is not regulated by international law in general. Misinformation, disinformation is not regulated in the meaning that it's allowed in the majority of cases. Even the perfidy, which itself is prohibited, but only perfidious killing, wounding, and capturing the enemy are those which are breaches of the IHL. So you see, and some others could be considered ruses of war, for example, right? So it depends each time. And that's what makes it also complicated while we talk about the AI and why we talk about the regulations. Law doesn't regulate everything. States were not able to agree about everything. And this is also an issue. It's not, we cannot say it's gap, because exactly Martin's Clause has been mentioned, for example. Martin's Clause is a small, actually a little clause that says that if there is no law, gap, the principles of humanity need to be applied. What it means? Well, we can have many interpretations and endless discussion on this, but there is no gap, at least.
Well, we...
Is that not included in what you
Again,
are doing?
again, espionage, intelligence, it's not what is regulated. What is mainly regulated, IHL, the purpose of IHL is not to serve states. The purpose of IHL to balance in favor of victims of armed conflicts. So to avoid the damage to civilians, to wounded, to sick, shipwrecked, prisoners of war, interned civilians, etc. So that's the idea, and that's why states were not able to regulate espionage, information gathering, and many other types of operations which do not amount to the level of attack, as we call them in the IHL. So not everything is regulated. So that's also important to know.
Okay. Well, looks like the Geneva Conventions need to be revisited. Okay, you and then Udani. No, let her, she has the mic, let her finish and yeah, come.
Thank you for the opportunity. I was formerly detention legal advisor for the ICRC at the Colombo delegation here. I have a question which is related to the legal framework in relation to Article 36 of the additional protocol. So since it's so difficult to regulate AI because we would be cutting down on its development for other users, how useful would be Article 36 to regulate even non-weaponized AI used in autonomous weapon systems? Thank you.
We'll come back. Yeah, pass it on in front here, Udani.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I will try to be brief in the interest of time.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Udani Gunardana, a director from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If I may, to add a bit of comment on what I see as the points of divergence in the GGE. Over the years, we have been struggling with this for 10 years in the GGE, and we are still struggling to find a definition, but I personally believe that we do not need a definition to progress our debate in the GGE. A working definition is already there, thanks to ICRC. I think ICRC is one of the first entities to come up with a working definition on the issue of laws. And then these elements such as meaningful human control, there's been a lot of debate, what does it mean by meaningful human control? And concepts such as reliability, predictability, traceability, explainability, these concepts are not included in IHL. This is an argument made by a small group of minority of states who are against, rather do not want to see any binding regulation on laws. And also principles such as IHRL are not relevant, for example, they say, to the CCW forum. And also the issue of consensus. This is why we've been struggling for more than a decade to arrive at a negotiating mandate, rather, for the CCW. So my question, Professor Andrea, for you, is about, you said that we will most likely have a legally binding instrument in 3 years. I assume that you meant this would be out of CCW, because it's very unlikely that we achieve this in the CCW. Perhaps that we are already moving it out, we have already moved to UNGA. Perhaps you meant a forum outside CCW. Then this argument is about not having all the stakeholders consenting to such a process of negotiation, and then they will be out of the treaty, that they will not sign it. But I do agree personally that it would mean something like TPW or even NPT. We have them on board, but they are not they are not complying with their obligations under the NPT. What do you think of having a legally binding instrument which do not have the militarized states, for example, on board? It would still create a lot of pressure, a persuasive value, I know, but the argument that that taking it out of CCW will affect the use of this potential treaty. And the other question I've been always wondering, what countries like Sri Lanka can do. We have been very vocal in the GGE. We have been speaking in the GGE, I think, over the 10 years in every single GGE. But nationally, what can we do? For example, I feel like maybe we should be already looking at developing national policies on artificial intelligence. This is not a legal question, but rather from a point of ICRC, what would you perhaps recommend states who would want to see regulation in autonomy in weapon systems and maybe in artificial intelligence in general? What can developing countries do in their national capacities within their national context? Thank you.
Udani was until recently in Geneva in the mission, so she brings a kind of an update from a country perspective sitting in these conversations. Now, Udani, looking at Geneva and looking at what Andre is talking about, what's going on in New York, what is the value added you see and what is the deficit?
Well, I think there's already convergence in Geneva after 10 years of this two-tier approach, Ambassador. This is something we see growing convergence.
Right.
Now that, but still, what does it really mean in terms of an instrument? Yes, this now the set of elements for an instrument is what we are looking at in Geneva, and then in New York we had the Secretary General's report coming out recently where he is recommending this he has been recommending, I think, back in since few years as well, of the need for a legally binding instrument. I would personally see value in moving this out of CCW because I feel enough is enough. I've been as a diplomat in Geneva, I've been personally very frustrated going and repeating in every GGE the same arguments because the agenda remained same for many years, and it was a struggle even to change the agenda items in Geneva because just a minority of states using their veto power on consensus. So I personally see value in taking it out of Geneva because we have no other option now, and this is what is happening in many other multilateral disarmament contexts. For example, we see a lot of militarized states looking at soft law, code of conducts. For example, they are introducing this responsible behavior now to space, for example, some countries, which they feel is better than having legal binding instruments on prevention of arms race in outer space, for example. So, sorry, I've just an example. So I feel that maybe there's so much value now in moving it out of CCW because we have, I think, hit a dead end.
What do you do with the countries in the UNGA who don't go along? Or like I said, who cop out pointing at other countries?
I think
that,
yeah.
Let's put it this way. That one group of countries, I said, don't say they don't want to go there, but they know that somebody else will say no, and there's a cop out. How do you get around that?
We see a lot of regional conferences proliferating right now. We had one in Latin America, we had one in our region as well. So regional awareness is one thing, I think, and also there will be a vote, if at all, in New York, unlike in the GGE. So, yes, so we need to, the majority of countries already, it's clearly evident in the GGE that the majority of countries do favor prohibitions and regulations on this issue. So the countries who do not really take a position will be forced to take a position when it comes to a vote, I believe.
Vidya, you want to looking at this issue?
Yeah, just to add, my name is Vidya Begunwadana, coordinator for on disarmament and development. We are very happy about today's program, and we are very thankful to the ICRC and the LKI organizing this event. This is the the event that we should carry in the future, because this subject should be discussed in details with the relevant parties, because if new treaty comes to effect very soon, within 3 years time. So we wish that Sri Lanka will be the first 50 signatories countries, and then Sri Lanka should pass the law immediately, implement the law in the country. So last month UNGA 161 states voted in favor of the resolution. Only 3 countries against. That was Russia, Belarus, and Republic of Korea. So we are very happy with that outcome. So world is positive to some extent. We hope to see a new treaty, and the government of Sri Lanka should closely work with the regional countries. I think Pakistan also taking the leadership. Janitra, she was there with the Civil Society International Campaign, twist of Killer Roberts. We are very happy. And as you mentioned, Ambassador, the disarmament is one of our main pillars within the foreign ministry and the Sri Lanka's foreign policy. We should take the leadership in the autonomous weapon system convention. Thank you.
Okay. One more question and then okay. One more, last one, right? I'm sorry. I'll come back to you. Let's take these 2 questions and then I think that should wrap up. So that we now point of 1 minute. Hello, let's hear you first. I'm trying to direction. You first, after that Kim, and then thank you very much. You've been a really attentive audience, and I think and thank all of you. And I'm going to give you Ajit and Nalin a chance to kind of wind up. I think, but the questions have been directed very much on the legal and IHL side. But gather your thoughts on some of those as well. Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. So my name is Watson Jatilaka. I'm from the Department of Social Sciences, General Research, John Kothalalu Defence University. My question is for Colonel Nalin Herat, sir. So since you mentioned that the military is about, many of the state militaries are about to get modernized through AI reliance, I want to ask on your personal opinion note, how do you think the military, the increase in AI, artificial intelligence influence on military, how will it impact on military decision process in terms of conflict escalation and de-escalation? And my second question would be a general question for the panel. In terms of the emerging concept of autonomous weapon systems, do you think AWS would be politicized in the international arena stage? For instance, in terms of in terms of global political stage, countries trying to monitor other countries in terms of maintaining, preventing WMDs in terms of using in warfare. Do you think AWS will politicize the global stage and countries might be backward towards of going for such mechanisms? So those will be my 2 questions. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Indika Sahabandhu. I'm a web journalist. I have to web journalist. I have to thank ICRC for taking initiative, arranging this very informative discussion. And previously I have come across an article where ICRC praised Buddhist teaching in conflict resolution. Now, we are a country where the entire law is based on the Buddhist teaching, where the Article 9 gives foremost place to Buddha Sasana. And AI is a large language model. And this is exactly why the Buddha said that his teaching should be preserved in Pali language, because now you understand what I mean. We are dealing with the anarchic nature of the world, and here we talk about AI, and the language model that they use is something, for me it is not mine. So this doesn't describe my perspectives on peace and conflict resolution. So when it comes to that's why I thank ICRC for previously writing and extensively emphasizing the need for Buddhist principles should be integrated in conflict resolution. And recently, Ambassador, if I may, Dr. Rajnath Singh said most of the conflicts in the world can be resolved through Buddhist teaching. He said this, Dr. Rajnath Singh, Defense Minister of India. India is a large country who carries out extensive research on in AI, and he said this in ASEAN Defense Forum a couple of weeks ago. So, so it is, yeah. This it is the duty of ICRC to reflect more on Buddhist principles. If you want to regulate, if you want to safeguard IHL. Now, when I asked AI to give parallels between Emperor Ashoka's dharmic policies and United Nations articles, it gave me a detailed description, similarities. So now UN, we see Lakshman Khadragama, Honorable Lakshman Khadragama's portrait there. He is the one who took Buddhism and the Vesak. He made it an international holiday. So we have to give much emphasis in Buddhist law, Buddhisasana law, and international law, which reflects Buddhist principles. Thank you so much.
All right. So, hi, my name is Ravi Telagadra, and I'd just like to extend my thanks to the panel for. So my name is Ravi Telagadra. I'm from the Institute of National Security Studies. I'm an intern. And I just wanted to extend a heartfelt thanks for allowing me this opportunity to ask the distinguished panel. And I wanted to thank you for the very insightful discussion that was mentioned earlier. So I also wanted to ask a few questions relating to everything that was thrown around earlier. And is it all? True. All right. I'll try to make it as concise as possible. I'll start off right now. All right. that'd be great as well. But yeah. So I just wanted to ask. My question is on the ambiguity on the term of autonomy when it comes to AWS. So. You have different ideas as mentioned by one of the other questionnaires of semi-autonomous weapon systems. You also have Cargo 2, an offensive autonomous system, versus the Iron Dome, which is a defensive autonomous system. All of these terms that are thrown around and come out of the woodwork. So I just want to ask, nations may mystify the veil of what makes these weapon systems AWS, or autonomous weapon systems, or what amount of human involvement makes it a semi-autonomous weapon system or an autonomous weapon system. So my question is on an internationally recognized definition on what exactly defines an AWS. That would be my first question. And my second question, I'd like to ask, highlighting interstate disputes. In the case of LAWs, in the case that LAWs as a concept and in production persist, what can we see from institutions such as the ICJ in navigating violations in the rules of engagement when it comes to interstate violations, or during engagements that armed belligerents go against what might be considered as IHL, and how it relates to LAWs as a whole, or AWS. So, yeah.
Any compelling question? Yes. Comment? Yes.
Hi, I'm Minwoo Jo from the Korean Embassy, and I just have a little comment about what the gentleman said at the end of the aisle here. I forget your name. I'm so sorry. Yep. You made a comment about how Republic of Korea has objected to the AI weaponization, or rather for the AI weaponization in the end. But I just wanted to let you know that Korea has been working on in Henswood with the Netherlands to come up with a for a resolution on the responsible usage of AI weaponization. So we are not. I just wanted to make it clear that Korea is not for the AI weaponization, but rather for the rightful usage of the AI in the warfare. So I think there's a clear distinction of being against and being for, and being somewhat in the middle of it, and we're just for the general. Excuse me, I'm just kind of cloudy on this. Yeah, I just wanted to say that we are not exactly for the weaponization.
Thank you for that clarification. That's appreciated. Okay, shall we get some reactions now from the panel? Shall we start with you, Ajit? You can kind of react to what has been going overall. It's 6:40. So
I'll be quick. I think the issue is
it's getting cold.
I suppose the issue is, to me, is that technology will be galloping ahead. We will be sorting out. I mean, AI is fantastically sorting out all these things. We talk about the human side, right brain and the left brain, and we are talking about these probabilities, rationalities coming up, the model versus the model, developing in that, working on. I mean, this is happening. If you look at the current last two Nobel Prizes, physics and chemistry, were given to Geoffrey Hinton on the physics one, was who came out of Google and talk about the AI issues, kind of like questioning in some directions. On the other side, on the chemistry, it's about wonderful what AI can do in terms of protein development and very rapid assessment of stuff. There's so much of things that can go into humanity, right? So engineering can be fulfilling. So I think the sad part of it is, all the time when we have a technology, we tend to this directional shift about power is where we hit a problem. We see there's so much of potential, we tend to move away from these potential opportunities to more towards about using the technology in an offensive mode. So I mean, that is something, that correction we have to do. That is probably the equation about the wise man and why we are so self-destructive. I mean, that is the direction. So I'm not sure about laws, but again, social responsibility behavior from the researchers and scientists. We have been talking about, the UN has some researchers' principles. It's just that they're not well known, right? Almost all countries do have ethics for that. But multiple professional organizations do have ethics in place, but they never use these things strongly. So I suppose that's where we have to just think on it and move on, because most of these technologies are so powerful. So it's almost like the early days of mutually assured mad strategy, the mutual assured destruction. We are heading in that way, right? If we do not understand this, the responsibility that we have in using the technologies that we ourselves develop for the betterment rather than against each one of us. I suppose that's the switch. But how internationally, how we can push in that direction?
Sir, I always telling there are three things: not cheap, Number one is defense. Number two is media. Number three is research. These three are not cheap. Today, that's why the global defense budget is going 2 trillion. This year, the budget is going up to 2 trillion US dollars. The annual global GDP is 80 trillion. Out of 80 trillion, the global defense budget is 2 trillion. So you can understand why US has 11 aircraft carriers, why they have such a sophisticated military. That's for the deterrence. I don't know, it's a different case how deterrence always works, but for the deterrence. So why Israel army is always having, they have one of the better deterrence system, but there is argument whether it was worked out. It's a different case. But defense, modernization, Rajendra, the question you asked, today most of the countries, they are eager and they are pursuing for modernizations. And the Russian president very recently announced that the Russian military has to be modernized based on the AI. So I don't know how it goes, but this thing is to avoid the conflicts, but the militarization, the tensions, geopolitical tensions, these things are happening. And one thing is, there is one argument, because of the AI, you can save money. The best fighter jet is F-35. The cost of F-35 is 100 million US dollars. But if you can now, you can buy kamikaze suicide drone for $135. You take thousands kamikaze drones, self-destruction drones, and sending it. And if you are sending a F-35 into the air, if anything goes wrong, you are losing the jet as well as the pilot. But it's a matter of taking few drones by spending small amount of money, and you achieve the same purpose. So this is the argument. So I think it's a quite debatable situation. So I think that the argument, it has now, the base is open. Let's see how it goes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nalin. Andre?
Thank you very much for your fantastic questions today. And I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. It's very interesting to be here and, well, to answer your questions and to contribute to your interest. So I will start. I will have a number of questions, and we have already skipped refreshments, unfortunately, as far as I see according to the schedule. So, Article 36. Indeed, there is an Article 36 in First Additional Protocol to Geneva Conventions of 1977 that say that any new mean or method of warfare should be considered carefully, whether its application will be in conformity with the requirements of the protocol and the conventions. And thanks to GGE, despite critics, thanks to it, we've seen that many states made specific statements about how the process under Article 36 of review of new means and methods of warfare work. So this is one of the results already, which is a good one, because Article 36 is not transparent one. It doesn't say that states need to reveal how specifically they make the review of the new means and methods of warfare. Those who are interested, the ICRC published many years ago the guideline on Article 36. Now we review, and the new edition will be published next year, where we explain how Article 36 is applicable. We accumulate the practice of the states, how they review these new means and methods. There are some pioneers, some flagships in this. I don't want to name concrete countries, but some of them who have very concrete procedures on how each and every, including the, I don't know, very tiny something that new employed as a new type of weapon for this specific army, they go through the review with this kind of manual, which is directed to commanders. And this leads me to another question on the responsibility or liability. There is always a human being who engages the technology, plans and engages. Technology cannot be guilty or unguilty exactly. And there is always a human being. So when we talk about the specificities or regulations of autonomous weapon systems, from the perspective of attribution of the responsibility, there is always a human being behind. On DGE, fantastic question. And here, just because I don't want to mention any concrete states, I would like to step out from my role as an ICRC delegate. So let me share with you what I think as a professor. First, thank a lot for your work. I mean, in DGE, we've seen raises and we've seen hopes, and we've seen, unfortunately, that not everything went as we thought can be. It is not the first DGE that ends up with this. I worked in the DGE on information and communication technologies. It's even worse. So, but first, this is a dialogue. It's a political dialogue. I don't know how many lawyers you have in your DGE. Usually it's not many. Usually it's those who come with the political statements. And that's why it takes so much time. Unfortunately, that's a bad fate, I guess, of the convention of 1980, because that's not the first DGE that didn't fly. There was another DGE on cluster munition. I don't know whether it still exists, but even after the cluster munition convention, they kept gathering and discussing something. And this is exactly where we are going, I think. So that's there is a high chance that probably we will see again the split of states, or because of the states are not able to gain the results that they hope to gain in the GGE or other processes, political processes they will get. But my question again is to you. Well, the law itself, who benefits the most from the law? Those who are powerful or those who are weaker? And the answer here is always the weaker one. Because law is a protection for those who cannot fight with physical force back. And then those who have the power, for some reasons, have to obey the law because of the smaller states, because of the group of states who put forward that there is a regulation and you need to abide, and etc., etc., etc. So I believe in the power of international law because we don't have anything else here. If we would keep being stuck with political discussions, they will be endless and without a result. So for me, the best result any political discussion might have is a legally binding instrument. And then, through the soft power, through the other means, we can promote them further. What specifically Sri Lanka can do? Well, I have to say, I cannot answer this question directly, but what I can say is to give a huge compliment. Because each time when Sri Lanka participated in GGE and was vocal, and not only GGE, in other groups and other forums, this is something that I'm, as a legal advisor, read and I'm happy. So next time when you contribute to the discussion, because Sri Lanka contributes to a very positive way to a discussion about autonomous weapon systems, and I want this to be heard quite well here in the room. And each time when you say something there, know that there is at least one regional legal advisor who will be happy. So if this would extend to cyber the same way as to autonomous weapon systems, so I would be twice as happy. On Buddhism, the ICRC has a number of projects that try to make like it's not comparison, but a support, to get support from the religious, cultural rules and IHL to draw to see that these IHL rules, they are not just the legal rules, they come from common sense. It's made on Islam and IHL. Another track is Buddhism and IHL. So I don't want to go deeper into this. Those who are interested, just Google. This is a very interesting project, and you will find a lot of information on this. So what makes AWS an internationally recognized definition? There is no internationally recognized definition. As many other internationally recognized definitions, they just do not exist. And even if there is a definition, it doesn't mean that all states subscribe under this definition. So you might have as many definitions as states plus international organizations, so endless. But it doesn't mean that progress stops. You see, we can disagree about the definition, but we still can agree about many things. I had a pleasure to be a co-author of Tallinn Manual 2.0. This is one of the books published by Cambridge which deals with public international law applicable to cyber operations. And there we had 19 experts from all over the world, Oxford, Cambridge, and other places. And we were quite often not able to agree about something. And we had to simplify the rule, so-called black rule, in bold, to simplify it, to be able to agree about it. But then in the comments, we say, okay, a few said this, a few said that, the majority said that, but there was no consensus about that. So that's how it evolves, that's how it goes forward. And that's what is perfectly fine with the IHL. And the last from my side, rules of engagement and autonomous weapon systems. That's indeed the issue. We, like military people, they know rules of engagement, they know how and when and what they do. With autonomous weapon systems, again, the problem is that it's super complicated to explain the system, what is legal, what is not. And you cannot limit, you cannot left it being limited in the context it is engaged. And you always need to have the person behind to be responsible for that. There was also an issue about, exactly in GG, there was a lot of discussions about that. The place a human should take in the decision-making loop. This is a big debate about this. Whether in the beginning, whether to be able to stop the attack, whether to be able just to reconsider the results of the attacks and then to change something. And that's where the states, many of the states, are disagree. My problem here is that with all the faith to technologies, sometimes they're not able to agree about the things that they actually can agree. But because of minor things, they cannot negotiate about. And indeed, I mean, the last thing from my side, again, we all have full faith in technologies. I'm pretty sure we use the technologies daily, and we believe that technologies is something that is super advanced. The problem is not to have, you know, reckless understanding of it. So just to understand that sometimes technologies, they are always twofold. And if to recall Jean-Jacques Rousseau, probably you know this philosopher, European philosopher, he was asked, he became famous by making an essay as a request of Dijon Academy. Dijon Academy made a question: to which extent the development of technologies contributed to the development of art, culture, and the society? And Rousseau dared to answer very negative, because people became worse, the people start fighting, new technologies bring new weapon. So this is another side of the technology. The problem for us is indeed to balance, to ensure that through many means, legal, ethical, discussions, technical as well, we see with internet development how technical protocols could limit the harm. So that's what we need to do, but for that we need action. Talking is not enough.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Professor Kosik covered pretty much everything. I just have one small addition in relation to the question on the definition that you asked, actually. Echoing everything he said, Professor Kosik, in terms of definition and how it kind of moves forward, the only thing I think I have to add is that I think right now where we are, the definition of just it being a weapon that would target and engage by itself would be sufficient for progress in terms of the movements we need right now. But if we do get into a treaty drafting stage, for that treaty to mean anything, then we will have to deal with those questions of human control. What is human control? What is effective? Is pressing a button enough? Is verification? Is there automation bias? And then that will be another 3-hour event. So yeah, in terms of discussion.
What about the question on what we can do in Sri Lanka?
I honestly think, given that I've also known the efforts that Sri Lanka is taking on the foreign platform, I feel like we're almost doing everything we can be doing. Oh, from here. I think generally on an overall regulation front for AI, like you said, that would exactly what you said would be great to not just. We've started a few things in terms of data protection, so on, which is largely in the same realm, but to keep pushing at that, I think your answer is probably the best answer right now.
Okay. It's just such a brilliant question. Again, being active. not to hide behind the other states, and that's what actually Sri Lanka is very successful in, and that's, I really mean it. And you mentioned the national position. This helps a lot. I mean, when states are vocal about their practice, about their opinion juris, about status quo, etc., it helps a lot to develop the dialogue. For organizations like the ICRC, which indeed have these two layers, the one we are in the front line. My previous 5 years were to serve in Russia, Ukraine, in Nagorno-Karabakh. I was in the front line, participated in many operations, visited prisoners of war. That's what we do on a daily basis. But another level which we indeed consider very important is this international level, where we really need allies, where we really need states who are vocal about the limitations, about the IHL compliance, about the demilitarization, etc. So this already a lot, but any national position is something that is very important to have.
Well, I think that has been quite an exhaustive session, but I think the attention looks like we can go on for 3 hours more. I didn't say there isn't tea, it's just that tea is delayed. I wish I had dinner to give you. Didn't expect this to go on so long. But I want to thank all of you for your presence here, Madam Kadiragama, Asoja, and those from these various fields. And it's nice that the questions themselves reflected the mix of this audience. And I think for Andre it must have been an interesting exercise of trying to, he's been traveling around the country, been to Jaffna and many regions, so I think and also I hope that Prabodhini, that this gives the ICRC's 75th anniversary of the conventions a good closing event. And as I said, Sri Lanka is deeply grateful to ICRC for all they've done for our country and for the world. They keep doing, for us they are doing as well. And I hope that we could continue, as the Additional Secretary said, with strength, our support to this issue, and to try to sharpen or narrow this gap and lead it to some conclusion which is which carries everybody along. So thank you very much and have a good evening.
On behalf of LKI, I would like to thank the panel and all present here this evening for taking the time to join today's session. I cordially invite you to join us in the library of LKI for refreshments. Thank you once more, and I wish you a very pleasant evening.